understand the economy, you have to understand human nature.
This podcast is powered by Acast.
How are you doing there? It is time for the podcast. It's going to be all football today, right? All football today. Looking back at the Premiership, looking forward to tomorrow's... And looking forward to tomorrow's Europa League final, which I'm going to. Atalanta versus Leverkusen in the Aviva, which is, it's very rare you see top flight football in Dublin. Very rare, particularly as the Irish Republic soccer team have imploded. And
just a little bit, yeah.
Just a little bit. But it's going to be talking about football today.
But of course, Mac, what's more important than the end of the Premier League and the European Cup in Dublin is the fantasy football.
Oh, yes, indeed.
And
okay, so just so you know that John is a fantasy football obsessive. He was just describing before we came on. Could we describe this on air? We probably could. Before we came on air, I feel like we're presenting panorama documentaries.
There's a red light above you.
Yeah, exactly. Before we came on air, John was telling me about in the Fantasy Football League, which is amongst our old mates, except I've opted out, which I'll explain to you in a minute as to why there is a mid-table battle going on.
Oh, big time.
For status or for Champions League position, is it?
Yeah, well, I see it as I'm going for number 6 position, which is it's just within my grasp if I can do it.
Yeah, this is a typical John Davis. He never goes for number 1; he goes for number 6.
Ouch, Mac! Ouch!
Most people say, "I'm going for runners-up." I'm going for number 6. Tell me it's 6 out of at least 20.
Oh, yeah. There's 22 of us or something.
Oh, okay. So
I'm actually kind of proud of myself. Myself and Sheena have been, going through all the stats of every player and buying and selling. It's brilliant. It's great crack. But
explain to me. This is fantasy football. I know it's been going for years and years. I've never played it. Okay, full disclosure. The reason I have never played fantasy football is because if I did, I would sit in McKenna's watching football Tuesday night, Wednesday night, Thursday night. I would get Sky Sports and I'd be watching obscure things. And
you'd have spreadsheets and everything.
I would. I would take it seriously. I don't have time for fantasy football. We've got other shit to do in the world.
No, we don't. But yeah, there's the big battle. And unfortunately, we're recording this on the eve of the final day of the Premier League.
Which is very typical of us, exactly. I know you might not know this, but we'll tell you next week who won the Premiership last week, okay? Because that's the type of podcast we are. But the reason we're doing this, John, not our mutual love of the beautiful game, but it all came to me when I was, last Wednesday night, I was in London. And I was giving a speech in maybe the most beautiful surroundings I've ever given a speech in, which was the British Museum.
Oh, Mac.
The British
you hit
Museum.
the big time there.
Yeah, no, but
that's like playing Wembley.
It's like playing Wembley, exactly. And speaking of Wembley, Leeds are playing next Saturday in Wembley,
Leeds.
Right? Don't say Jesus Leeds.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, up Leeds, come on.
Okay. We'll be singing MOT, marching on together before you know it. Anyway, but let's come back, right? I was in the British Museum giving this speech. There were about 300 or 400 people there. It was an amazing backdrop. It's amazing.
Was it in the main auditorium with the glass ceiling? That's gorgeous.
It was extraordinary. It was extraordinary. And like
just beside the Rosetta Stone?
Just beside the Rosetta Stone. So I was, exactly. So let's talk about the British Museum. So I was in there. I get it. They robbed everything, right?
Yeah.
Look, let's not make it too, I get it. It's the face of colonialism. I get all that stuff, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, and did they rob?
Yeah.
But I'm looking at Sumerian stuff. I'm looking at Egyptian stuff. And exactly, in fairness to the British, their main line of defense is they weren't the only one.
Yeah.
Pergamon in Berlin, all robbed from Lydia, from the Lydian civilization.
Right.
The Louvre, all robbed, right? So basically all European colonizers went and robbed. All American museums largely bought European treasures at discount prices in the Second World War and the First World War.
Is that right?
Yes.
Wow.
So when the Europeans ran out of money in the First and Second World War and the governments needed to raise money to actually fight the Second and particularly the First World War, American investors from the Gilded Age came in and bought everything. That's why all the treasures of Europe are in America.
Wow, didn't know that.
Yeah,
now.
so it was a transactional deal.
Yeah.
So the Europeans, think about it, the Europeans had to raise money to fight the wars.
Yeah, of course.
America was in the First World War, America was the only country that remained aloof until 1917.
Yeah.
And between 1914 and 1917, American rich families bought everything, which is why they have all these foundations and all this sort of stuff.
Right.
With all the gems. But anyway, so I'm in the British Museum and I'm thinking, this is an institution that maybe more than any other institution underscores the extraordinary reach of Victorian imperial Britain when Britain was an empire. And I was thinking, what institution represents Britain today, right? What represents British power, soft power, or the state of the place, right? And I know the English at the moment are down on themselves. And it's very, very clear when you're having conversations over there, they're politically, economically, but there are certain things that the English do extremely well. And I think the institution that most represents modern Britain is the Premier League, right? It is a global brand. It's such an icebreaker. I find it's the best icebreaker in the world.
Yeah.
You sit down beside somebody, say, well, Liverpool played brutal last night, or Leeds are on the up, or Man United are brutal, or Man City are kind of just a bunch of mercenaries, and you're in.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, it's true. Yeah.
So it is this amazing global brand that has been created in England at a time when, had you said to me I remember actually years ago, this is how football has changed completely, watching the FA Cup final in Trinity, in the Pav and Trinity in the late 80s, and there were only 3 of us watching it, right? Football in the late 80s was a pariah sport.
Right, yeah.
A real pariah sport, because it was after Hillsborough, it was after Heysel, it was full of hard men and hooligans and heavy drinking. It was very, very male, and there was a sense that this was a sport on the way out.
Yeah.
And then something happened in the 1990s, which is called the Premiership, which starts in 1992. Team that won the first Premiership, John?
Leeds?
Yes! Okay.
That was a gimme.
That was a gimme. That was, I just crossed it over to you. You just had to head it in. That was a tap in, right? Okay. But let's talk about the evolution of the Premier League.
Yeah.
And the reason I want to talk about it is this extraordinary cultural export that the English have managed to do. And they do it again and again and again. So when they're down on each other and they don't realize, you got to say, hold on a second, you're really good at some things. And what they're really good at, I think, is repackaging popular culture and selling it abroad. So whether it's the Beatles or Led Zeppelin.
Yeah, well, I was going to say, music was always...
Yeah. Or TV formats. They're amazing TV formats. True. And like we talk about maybe winning 1 or 2 Oscars in Ireland and we go, man, they win Oscars all the time. They've Oscar-winning directors all the time. And Britain produces extraordinary amounts of popular entertainment talent. And this is what they're really, really good at. The whole 1990s English culture, I don't know, and of course, grime and drum and bass, these are all English inventions, right?
Yeah.
So it's a combination of the English language helps enormously, but there is a creativity, there is a popular culture creativity in England, which I think in a sea of miasma about Brexit and the end of the industrial power, and you forget.
Yeah.
You forget that they're very good.
Yeah, well, we've been quite down on England and Britain as a result of Brexit and stuff. By the way, it's never a slight on the population, on the English.
All of whom are listening.
Yes. but you know what I mean? It was just on the Tories more than anything else.
It was a specific, I think Brexit got under our skin because it gave voice to a type of England that I think we just couldn't bear, which was the sort of the red trousers, gammon-y, that type, right?
The gammon man, yeah.
The gammon man, yeah. And it promoted, the people like Boris Johnson, like awful people, right?
Yeah.
And they're the worst side of England.
Yeah.
They're the worst face of England. They were always there. You always knew they were there, but they were a minority sport. And then for about 5 years, they became the face of England and the face of Britain. And that was an awful thing. But let's go back to the Premiership, right? What really strikes me, if, for example, the Premiership is one of England's biggest cultural exports at the moment. It all came home to me when I went to see Ireland's undoubtedly biggest cultural export of the last 30 years, which is U2. It's like that U2 are the icebreaker as well.
Yes.
People, right. And I went to see them in Vegas, as I told you, before Christmas. And I was in a taxi with a Jamaican taxi driver. And it was, in the beginning, I didn't quite get the accent. And then you get the kind of Jamaican lilt. And then he figures that we're not American. And his very first question is, the Arsenal. Not Arsenal, the Arsenal, right?
Okay.
Because, so there obviously is for aficionados of Arsenal.
Yeah.
There's the Arsenal and Arsenal.
Yeah.
And again, he was saying to me, of course, he's like 8 hours behind. And he's up at 4 a.m., 5 a.m. every Sunday morning or Saturday morning to watch the games.
Wow, really?
Right, yeah. And then he was talking about all these Jamaicans do this and etc. And it's only that you realize you could be in Rome, you could be in Vegas, you could be in New York, you could be in Dubai, you could be anywhere. And the Premiership is a common denominator. When I went to Dubai to do a gig recently in McGettigan's, which is a big Irish pub, what's on is Premiership football.
Yeah, it's always on. Yeah.
So you realise that this is much bigger than just a football league. And I got thinking of the fact that maybe what we tend to think of is England, the cultural idea, is a country with a football league. But maybe it's not. Maybe England is a football league with a country stuck onto it, right? Okay. But in terms of people's public discourse about England and public discourse about the state of Britain, it defaults to football. And it's a really phenomenal soft power that has been created and engineered in a very short period of time.
But how significant then is the Premier League to the economy?
Well, I think it's extremely significant. So if you just look at the actual numbers, and again, football purists who I call the wet terrace brigade. There's people who say, well, if you're not in Dalymount Park and you're getting pissed on, you're not a real football fan.
Right.
Or if you're not up at Rovers in Tala, you're not a real football fan. You are. Everyone's a football fan. It doesn't really matter. And they worry about the kind of the shiny floor presentation of football commentary and the Gary Nevilles and the Roy Keanes and all this. But it's all part of the entertainment business. Yeah. The Brits have repackaged the whole thing into entertainment.
Yeah.
But if you look at what has happened in the last while, now purists will say it's entertainment. It's not the working man's game. That's all true. But the reason the Posh and Becks thing is interesting is because that seemed to me to represent the cultural crossover where football and entertainment became intertwined in the face of a couple. So David Beckham and Victoria Beckham. What was her name? Victoria? I can't remember what it is.
Posh Spice.
Posh Spice, yeah.
That was her name.
Whose greatest retort to Elton John was very, very funny.
Go on.
She was on a chat show with Elton John and she looks at Elton and Elton looks at her and she goes, Elton, I didn't think we had so much in common, because the chant was Posh Spice takes it up the arse. And she was only about 22 when she came out with that. That was just such a good line. I mean, I just thought she is a superstar. Anyway, but that whole period, right, is when I think football became a mass market entertainment product. Now, if you fast forward to now and you look at the numbers are kind of phenomenal, right? Deloitte, the consultancy, produces a football money league every year. It's a report on the money behind football, right? So what it shows you, right, is that last year was the most successful year for football in terms of revenue, in terms of income, and in terms of the amount of people going to see football.
Right.
So commercial revenues of the Premiership clubs hit 4.4 billion. That's a 16% increase on this time last year, right? Now, the TV rights of the Premiership alone rose by 30%. The foreign TV rights last year.
In 1 year?
In 1 year.
30%.
It means millions of people are watching this thing worldwide, right? On average, and this is like you're talking about your clubs, you're like your middle of the road clubs, right?
Yeah.
The average TV rights for a middle of the road club in the Premiership is 250 million euros. That's $250 million, the average rights.
Wow.
Right?
By the way, I was a member of Fulham FC at one stage when I was living there.
Were you?
I was, yeah. Just so
are you still a member?
No. I was a member because I could get tickets then. Or you'd first shout on tickets.
Craven Cottage.
To Craven Cottage, yeah. And I saw Fulham versus Leeds there many years ago, myself and Al.
Fulham probably won.
I can't remember.
These didn't travel well. Not good in the road. Not good in the road. But,
Come on.
Exactly. Have to go back to the cauldron, not Ellen Road. But just look at the numbers, right? And this is interesting, right? The average Premiership club has revenues rose to around 500 million. And this is comprising of 220 million in commercial revenue. So that's merchandising, souvenirs, shirts, all that sort of stuff. 213 million in broadcast revenue. So broadcast revenue is almost as much. And then the gate is hilarious. The gate is only 18%, 93 million.
Right.
So they raise
Which is surprising given the price of the tickets.
Precisely. So it's amazing, right? So they raise, so still, interestingly, despite the Premier League's extraordinary success, Real Madrid is still the richest club, generates the most revenue.
Really? More than Man United? Because it was always Man United for years.
Yeah. So Real Madrid is the biggest club in the world, but 8 of the top 20 clubs are English by revenue.
Right.
And that's the key. So you've got Bayern Munich, you've got a couple of the Italian clubs, AC Milan, you have Real, you have Barca, all those.
Yeah.
But the biggest chunk come from the Premier League, right? Of revenue generating companies, right? And the Premier League dominates all European rivals. Its revenues are nearly double that of La Liga and the Bundesliga.
Right.
So this is, again, the way the English have managed to repackage the whole thing and resell it. And of course, now they get the best players. They get by far the best players.
Well, that's it. That's the thing. You know, the likes of Man City are just buying the Premier League.
They're buying the Premier League. And then the interesting, I'm going to come on to that in a second, but the cultural export is expressed most significantly in tourism, right? 1.5 million visitors came to the UK last year to go and see a football match. That is 1 in every 27 tourists came to watch football.
Wow, that's quite incredible, actually.
It's a phenomenal amount.
Yeah.
And those people, after COVID, right, those tourists spend on average £909 each going to a game. So it's the hotel.
That'll be the ticket then,
the ticket. Yeah, exactly. The couple of pints, all that.
Yeah.
In contrast, the average English person, exactly, who's going to, say, for example, from Manchester to London, spends about £600. So the tourists spend more.
Yeah.
1 in 27 is going only to watch football. So it's a huge part of Britain's tourist industry is now people travelling. Like, you go to Dublin Airport any Saturday morning and the flights are jammed.
Yes,
Jammed.
Yeah.
In fellas who should be a little bit too old to wear club colours. There should be a rule, I think.
They're a bit stretched.
They're snug. Let's just say they're slightly snug. I think there should be a rule. You can only wear club colours under 30.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And then I think the Ned gets the better of it. With the battle with the Ned and Lycra, the Ned is always going to win.
Yeah, it's so true.
Exactly.
Just keep it as a pyjamas and that's grand.
As pyjamas is fine, right? Now, but interestingly, just in case you thought it's a good business to own, it's not. And this is the most significant thing, right? Even though they have this total revenue of about 4.6 billion, the total wage bill in sterling is 3.8 billion, right?
Wow.
So all the money goes to the players.
So what's that, 80%, 80?
80% or so goes to the players. And this is the fault line in the financing and the business and the economics of the Premiership. Because it's all about winning trophies and because the players now are the key asset, not the brand, not the sponsorship, nothing. And because TV rights go on eyeballs, and of course the best players get the most eyeballs, etc., 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 the players are getting all the money.
Yeah.
And this is why an enormous amount of fragility is baked in to the business model.
But you know, I hear a lot from my mates, Bill and the likes, who were always big football fans, just sports fans in general, but they'd always watch the Premier League. But now you hear the refrain all the time, money's ruined football and I wouldn't watch it anymore. You know, the likes of, as I mentioned, Man City, you know, spending enormous amounts of money, bringing players in, which is just essentially buying it's buying the title.
So this is of course the cultural battle at the heart of football, which is, what is it?
Yeah.
Right? Is it the Harlem Globetrottersization of football teams. So the link between, for example, a Man City and Manchester is tenuous at best because the players are not necessarily anymore from Manchester, right? Man United, etc. Liverpool seems to be stronger. Everton seems to be stronger. Newcastle seems to be stronger. Chelsea, is it a West London club? I'm not sure. Yeah. Is the Arsenal a North London club? I'm not so sure. Are the Spurs a North London club? Yeah, their DNA is North London.
Yeah. But the funny thing and the ironic thing, though, Mac, is that, for all their money and for all their investment from the Qataris and the whole lot, buying up all the clubs and paying for all these big players, they're still not winning the Champions League.
That's absolutely true. And let's talk about this after the break.
Okay. So, Mike, for such a successful industry as the Premier League in the UK, can they use that model, in other parts of the UK economy?
Okay, so I think what we've got to stand back and talk about two things. One is that the Premiership is emblematic of globalisation on steroids. It is the epitome of globalisation. The players come from everywhere. The capital comes from everywhere. The fans now come from everywhere. The platform isn't selling football to the guys and the girls who go to the games. Yeah. It's selling football to broadcast networks, which are all global. So nothing more betokens globalisation than the Premiership. But that doesn't mean success. This is the interesting thing.
Yeah.
So I mentioned earlier, this is not a good model for business. Why? Because all the returns go to the workers. In fact, Karl Marx would be very happy with Man City, right? Because the actual workers, who are the footballers, get all the readies. And the capitalists,
I see. Yeah,
right?
That's good.
The capitalists who own. So it's a sort of dystopian hyper-globalization plus Marx world we've got into.
Yes,
right?
It is. Yeah, so look at it like that.
Okay, so the workers, who are the footballers, get all the money.
Yeah.
The capitalists, the owners of the club, are constantly flirting with bankruptcy, which is why if you are relegated, you go bankrupt or you lose an enormous chunk. Yeah. And that's why, of course, this crazy and kind of fascinating last few weeks of the Premiership is interesting, because the clubs that are about to go up from the second division to the Championship, they stand to gain enormously. The clubs that are going to go down, they stand to lose, but the players don't lose so much because they move on.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It's the actual owners. So this is an amazing business because it's a hyper-capitalistic business that is jaundiced against capitalists, which is quite interesting, right? And of course, what does that end up? It means the people who really end up owning football clubs are not business people. They're sheikhs and oligarchs, and it's like trinkets for rich men,
Yes.
So it's, is it Qatar or Saudi Arabia, or don't know who owns these places. But these guys, so it's just trinkets because it's not a business.
Right, and it's part of their sports washing as well.
It's sports washing, yeah. It's part of their, exactly. It's part of a bigger branding, marketing exercise for rich men or for nebulous regimes to, as you say, sports wash, right? Because it doesn't make any sense to invest this much money when the returns are so linked to winning. And we know that in general, the more money you spend, the more likely you are to win over time.
There is the hobby element of it, though, with Will Farrell coming in and buying shares in Leeds.
Wrexham, is it, or Leeds?
No, he's Leeds. He's bought in Leeds.
Has he?
Who's the other guy? Not Ryan Gosling, the other guy. I always get the two of them mixed up. Buying Wrexham. Yeah,
well, the Wrexham one is a kind of an option, right? So they're buying it at an option price, and they're hoping to actually hit the
Ryan Reynolds, is it? Ryan Reynolds?
I don't know anything about Hollywood. I'm brutal on Hollywood. Yeah. Burt Reynolds, Ryan Reynolds, Johnny Reynolds, Mick Reynolds. Your man Mick Reynolds' younger brother, Pat Reynolds.
Albert Reynolds.
Albert Reynolds, exactly. I've no idea, right? But let's come back to the idea. Fascinatingly, there are no English clubs in either the Europa League final and the Champions League final, which means that although money invariably and usually buys success, it doesn't always buy success. But I'm thinking that because, and it's a really fascinating idea, and it's something that has happened in England before in sport. So, for example, and I think this is a really good economic model for countries, there is what they call in England the Wimbledon model. And the Wimbledon model is, Wimbledon is still probably in the top 4 tennis tournaments in the world.
Oh, I thought you meant Wimbledon Football Club.
No,
Jesus. Hang on
Vinnie
a second.
Jones.
Yeah.
Do you remember the picture of Vinnie Jones grabbing Gaza by the balls?
Yeah.
It's an extraordinary.
But he's turned into a brilliant actor.
He's a great actor.
Yeah.
He was in The Gentleman.
Yes, he was. Yeah, he was great.
But the Wimbledon model is, and this is fascinating, it's for a greater discussion on how you orientate your economy. And I think we in Ireland have done this very well, and we don't even realise it. So the Wimbledon model is the following. It still hosts one of the top tennis tournaments. England does. In the English Lawn Tennis Club or whatever it's called, right? But there's no English players, or very, very few.
Yeah.
So the idea then is that a model for the economy? That you can still host the best companies, but you don't necessarily have any players. And Ireland is the great example of that. We host all these multinational companies. We've no players in the game.
Yeah.
But it doesn't really matter because you're getting the revenues from them. In the same way as it doesn't matter for Wimbledon if an English player doesn't win the tennis. But I think the lesson for countries from the Premier League is the following. And this is what I think is interesting. In a world of free movement of talent, reasonably free movement of labour, total free movement of capital, the country that succeeds is not necessarily the country that has the natural resources, but it's the country that hosts the best party. So imagine that the Premier League is like hosting the best party.
Yeah.
Is that you've got the best guests, you've got the best DJs, you've got the best booze, you've imported it from everyone, you've got the best house for the party, you have the best party, right?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
so imagine that, right? That's what the Premiership is. It's the best party. Now, it's not necessarily the case that the best players are from England, even though some of them are very good. It's definitely not the case that all the capital is from England. In fact, very little of it is.
Yeah.
We know that absolutely none of the managers are from England. There's not one top flight English manager. Not one.
Newcastle.
Top flight-ish.
Yeah, well, they're
Is he English? What's his name?
Eddie Howe.
Hasn't he not been fired?
No.
Is he still there? Okay.
Yeah.
So there's one.
Yeah.
There's one English player.
And there's Luton as well, your man from Luton.
Yeah. So there's 2 out of 20.
Yeah.
Right? So the rest of them are foreign. So as
Sean
I said,
Dyche.
He's from where?
He's English as well.
Yeah.
Sean Dyche.
So that's 3 out of 20, right? But my point is that
I'll
it's
think of another one in a second.
highly internationalist. Has an English manager won a Premiership title?
I no idea. No.
Nor do I, but it's a good question.
Yeah.
Just thought I'd get you the help there.
Answers on a postcard, please.
Exactly. But you get my point.
Yes,
Jesus,
I do.
John, you get my point.
I do.
Stop fucking tripping me up. I'm about to score a goal here. I'm weighing up the thing. You know, I missed a few sitters in Italy. This is my reprieve. Right? Come back to the idea, right, that Ireland is a bit like the Premier League. We host the best companies. We give them tax breaks. We don't ask too many questions. They give us tax revenue. They don't ask too many questions. Talent-wise, if the talent isn't here in Ireland, we get it elsewhere. They come here. They add to the entire package. And in general, the society is better off and the country is better off for the gig.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean you own the multinational companies. And this is one of the things that when I look at political and economic analysis in Ireland, there's this obsession with looking at Irish companies vis-a-vis foreign.
Yeah.
Which would be a bit like if you're a football fan saying, oh, well, you know, Liverpool isn't an English club, so I will follow them.
Yeah.
Because it hasn't got all English players, all English capital, all English management, all, you know. That's over. So the new world is a world of the Premiership. And we, I think, in Ireland have actually managed to play that game better than most, simply because we didn't have the capital in the first place. So I think the economic lesson for the Premiership is, number one, that England is very good at popular culture, repackaging it, remarketing it, and reselling it. And at a time when England is down on itself, it should look at the Premiership as an example of things they do very, very well. They also do music very, very well, and film and TV and advertising, all that sort of stuff. That's the second thing. The third thing is that as an institution, the Premiership is to the 21st century what the British Museum was to the 19th century.
Yes.
It shows British power and British ingenuity and expression in a way that most of the parts of society and economy over there don't reveal anything.
Yeah.
But finally, for us in Ireland and for small countries all over the place, the Premiership is a very good representation of the economy that you can produce if you're agnostic about ownership. And I think we should be agnostic about ownership and bring it on.